this video I want to examine the history of magic wands, what they mean, where they come from, and how they have still such a grasp on, well, fiction especially, and so Harry Potter being very famous in recent years, and really brought forth again the power of the wand, the magic wand or the magic staff. However, this of course is a piece of fiction, but there is some very real history in regards to this, and it's been largely lost, and well, not really lost, but it's especially amongst, let's call them, the alternative community. They've missing the point, missing the well-known history of the wand and connecting it, uh, um, joining it to what is contemporary fiction and connecting it to there. But there is quite a bit. So again, the magician's wand, and throughout this video I'm going to be talking about Thoth and Hermes and these other gods and rulers from the past who so often connected with magic. But what is the magic that they are passing on? What is the knowledge that they are passing on? And how is it especially connected through the magician's wand? And remember, a magician is a trickster, just like the trickster god Hermes, someone who has a higher level of knowledge and is able to, what is science to one and knowledge to one person becomes magic to another. And so, for instance, the wizard staff or the magician's wand is just a common theme throughout literature and folklore. However, again, there's a strong, deep connection to real history. Lord of the Rings, for instance, and the wizards. Recent years, especially this type of wand, the magic wand connected to the Harry Potter series and this type of storytelling, and for instance in the Elder Wand, which was this the most powerful wand. But the wand store and with the Ollivanders and again this. But however, what's the origin of this? Well, throughout history we will see these legends of the magic staff or the magic wand, and the famous one comes from Exodus, and where Moses would challenge the Pharaoh and his magicians to do magic, and they sort of, there was a back and forth, and then and very much in the way like magicians' tricks are still very important, and again how magicians jealously keep their secrets. But for instance, in the story of Exodus, Moses would challenge the Egyptian priests to a duel of magic, and yeah, there was a back and forth, and so one worked out the other one's tricks and then repeated it, and then but that's one example of how still in the history and the legends passed on that the magic wand or the magic staff has been passed, carries on through. However, as I'm going to show, there is some very solid meaning to this, and again, it's one of those things where how can I put this delicately, where I want to put a certain level of mysticism onto some things which are very scientific and about knowledge, and I'll show you exactly what I mean by that. But again, the wand of the hermeticist or the magician or the wizard is a common theme carrying through history, and in esoteric organizations such as Freemasons, the deacons carry the wand or the staff, and again this has a very important meaning to stone masonry and construction, from the Great Pyramids through to the cathedrals, through to the modern structures, major public buildings and cathedrals of this day. And it has a very symbolic meaning. So with all these things, there are multiple levels of meaning. But to begin with, I'm not going to explain all of them because I don't understand all of them. However, there are some very important aspects in regards to wands and staffs that are generally overlooked. And so for instance, Freemasonry, the deacons with the wand. And even if you look at the symbols of Freemasonry, you have the square, the plum, the compass, scales. Again, these tools of construction, and even there we see the wand it's a direction of the sword. But all of these are symbols of construction, but also connected to what will be called magic as well. But you have to remember that as Arthur C. Clarke put it, any technology significantly advanced will appear as if magic. And the people who built the great cathedrals, the pyramids, the temples of old, had a secret knowledge that was and that knowledge was very much based on weights and measures and geometry, and what we now call the modern sciences. However, what is a wand? What does it actually mean? Well, if the original meaning of a wand is like a reed or a cane, but also a wand or a measuring rod. And that's one of the key points I'll be discussing in this video, how the wand is actually a tool of measure, and that not in just a literal sense, but also in a symbolic and legal sense. This is a very important aspect in regards to this, which again is generally overlooked by some in the alternative. Now, so the wand has to do with the ancient science or magic of weights and measures. And for example, Thoth, Hermes or Mercury all carry the wand or the measuring tool. They were all gods of weights and measure. Thoth, Hermes, Mercury, gods of magic, gods of weights and measure, gods of knowledge, gods of science, as we would call it now. But back, this is a relatively modern term, but the sciences goes back a long time, whether it's metallurgy, construction, stonework, glass making, dyes, paint, everything that we would sort of put under engineering, chemistry and physics was known in ancient times, and it was practiced in ancient times as seen through temples, cathedrals, the pyramids, and road construction, again metallurgy, and all the sciences of chemistry, physics that we would call those today, but they were being practiced a long time ago. But it's quite literally the physical evidence is there in these great temples of old. And so the yardstick or a ruler, if you probably have one at home, that is a magic rod. That's a wand, and that's literally the term of what it means. And you'll find that throughout history, throughout all cultures, the importance of the wand or the rod or the measuring tool is at the heart of all of this, whether it's construction, chemistry, physics, as that was expressed in older times. So magic wands, this will be the feature of this particular series. I'm going to split it up into a few pieces because it will run for an hour as a whole. But hope you enjoy this, because it will be examining some features, some parts, especially in regards to ancient Sumer, Egypt, the Indus civilization, and Greek, Roman, Saxon medieval period, and again, weights and measures being one of the keys. Ancient science, weights and measures are the foundation of the modern sciences as they were before. It's about observation and measurement. So if we begin with the Egyptian god Thoth or Thoth, some other variations on the pronunciation, but there's some very important information. Now, some of it's out there, and I want to present some other information in regards to this and how it will connect to Hermes and to many other important gods across the ancient world. And we begin with Thoth, as it's sometimes pronounced now. So we begin with this image, and here we see Thoth or Thoth and feeding the ankh, and there's some very important symbolism in regards to this, but it has to do with, most importantly, weights and measures, and how these will connect, and we'll examine that in a moment. So we have Thoth or Thoth, or some other Thoth, sometimes pronounced as well, but I'll be calling him Thoth. And to begin with, so he's carrying two rods, and you can notice that there are snakes coiled around the rods. And we come to the top there, and we see these the two cobra heads, and they're wearing two different hats. Well, they're different crowns. They're the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt. So it was under King Nama, or Mina, sometimes called, and the Nama Palette, and he is said to have united the Upper and Lower Egypt, and that is usually regarded as the beginning of Egyptian civilization, but I think there's some issues around that because it's a bit arbitrary because it's well, we do have a lower and an upper kingdom, so there was, and whether he reunified it or unified it is a little bit out there, a little bit up in the air, but either way, so you very often see the pharaohs wearing a crown, and you'll notice, but it's actually the crown of Lower and Upper Egypt put together, and here we see them delivering them uh, with Thoth and the two rods. Now, there's some very important information here, and we'll have a look at that. So to begin with, the angle of uh, these rods is at a 6-degree separation. Now, that's as other researchers have noticed, for instance, at Luxor, and what's often called the temple, so Karnak and Luxor and this temple of man, how there's an offset there, the angle doesn't remain consistent. And well, it happens to be at 6 degrees. And this carries on for like city planning, especially in regards to the esoteric, or what's called the occult, as in hidden. In city plans such as Washington, Canberra, Brasilia, Astana, Versailles, and these other places, this 6 degrees, and especially connected to Freemasonry as well, it pops up so often, and I'll have a look at that. Okay, before we go there, I'll have okay, just a few examples of 6 degrees. So Canberra in Australia, which is Australia's version of Washington DC, overloaded with city plan symbolism. The buildings themselves, all the same measures, all the same numbers, very hermetic, very occult, but it's 6 degrees from true north. So we have Northbourne Avenue, the main road, the defining road entering Canberra, but it's 6 degrees from true north. I also pointed out in another video, I explained why the Washington Monument is not directly south as what most would expect. It's actually 377 feet off center. But again, this carries through. I've done a few videos on that. It's again one of these very important numerical measurement symbols that carries across the world, and that it creates a 6-degree angle. So it's in Washington as well. The Axe d'Historique in Paris, we have again this. So from the Louvre, so you have the main axis where the Arc de Triomphe, so forth is. And then from the Louvre, just the gardens at the Louvre, just before it would begin, there's a 6-degree offset. Again, for instance, Macquarie Street in Sydney, set up by the Governor Lachlan Macquarie, conscientious Freemason. The city plans, all that he did, it's all very hermetic. And once again, it's 6 degrees off center, and there's some important astronomical reasons to that, and I'll maybe cover that in the future, but it's an area of research if you are interested. Now, he also set up Liverpool, and again Macquarie Street in Liverpool, just down the road from me here. Again, you'll see how it's not on true north, it's actually 6 degrees north. I didn't pick the right illustration, but it's exactly the same thing. Other people have also noticed that, for instance, from the center to the top of the upper chamber of a king's gallery is a 6-degree off center as well. And there are plenty of other examples I have of that, but just for the moment. And so if we go back to Thoth and the 6 degrees, which is in Karnak, but again, these many other places in the modern and across the ancient world. And it's one of the first things, if you're into researching this area, look at the temple orientation and look for 6 degrees. You'll find it so often. And there are some very good reasons for that. It's Theosophists have pointed out that it's they call this the solar angle, but it's also 6 degrees is 1/60th of the 360-degree circle. So you have 1/60th of a circle, especially like base 60, 60 minutes per day, 60 minutes per second, pops up in Babylonian maths, and very important element to consider as well. And another one, so famously raising the Jed, and we have that it's tilted at this specific angle as well. You can see here's the crown of, see how the same crown of Upper Egypt, and there we can see wearing again the crown of Lower Egypt as well. So you have this, but what's important about the raising the Jed is the angle. And if we now, I'd like to be more accurate, but because you can see the line going across here, but the photo is not exactly level. So if you when I was doing this, I noticed ever so slightly it was not on directly on center, but if you take into account the angle of this photo, well, it actually does line up. So this particular rod or wand, which is held by Thoth, reflects the 6 degree, 23.4 degree tilt of the raising the jed. Why again is that important? Just like the 6 degrees having astronomical, so if you want to line your city up to certain astronomical events, 6 degrees is an important way to do it. Numerically, 6 degrees, the numbers it converts to, all the angles, again, all this very hermetic harmonic Pythagorean knowledge. But it also explains the tilt of the Earth, why we have the seasons. So previous video I uploaded, I explained the ratio of the Great Pyramid to the size of the Earth and how it's 86,400 is the better explanation for it, for many reasons for that. Which again, it's suggesting that they had, as in geometry, Earth measure knowledge. Well, this is another element of, on top of the Great Pyramid, the astronomical alignments within the pyramid. It's just to call it all coincidence and to dismiss it is, it's a pathology. It's denial is a mental illness, to be frank, because these things don't happen by accident, and it's built into the architecture, it's built into the legends and the symbolism. And well, again, just as with that 6 degree offset, the pyramid, the unfinished pyramid on the dollar bill, famous symbol, that also matches raising the jed at the tilt of the Earth, and therefore matches this depiction of Thoth. And lastly, the coiled snakes. Well, I'll get to that in the next section when we have a look at Hermes / Mercury and this snake symbolism and the rods, how it connects to weights and measures. And by that, because who exactly, what is Thoth? What does he do? Well, he's the moon god, and so you'll often see depictions of him with a disc above his head, the moon disc. But he was the god of weights and measures, because he was also the god of knowledge and also the god of magic. And well, magic is a loose term, because any science or like the magician's trick, if you don't understand it, it would look like magic, but it's actually done with some basic science. Now, for instance, in the story of Exodus, and how Moses did battle with the priests of the Pharaoh, and they basically tried to outdo each other with magic tricks. Now, it's sort of off topic. If you're interested in, have a look into the Indian rope trick, and it's just amazing. It was recently reperformed again, and even the top magicians can only explain some elements of how they did this trick, and that's just one of my things. So Thoth, god of knowledge, god of weights and measures. Weights and measures, what are they? That is science. That's the basis of science. Science is about observation and measurement, and from there developing theories. So knowledge is science. Weights and measures are the fundamental building block of all sciences. Also, here's a depiction. So I've photoshopped this on, but this is an Australian white ibis, sometimes also called sacred ibis. That's what the head of Thoth depicts. And this is the African sacred ibis. Now, in Australia here we have the sister bird, so that's the African. While here in Australia we have the Australian white ibis, also sometimes called the sacred ibis as well. So that's one of that's where the depiction. That's what the bird head of Thoth is depicting. But it's also relevant because we're going to have a look at Hermes and the connection to birds and gods of weights and measure. But that'll be in the next section. Thoth, the god of knowledge, the god who delivered the skill of writing, magic, and weights and measures. Well, you can see he's reflected in many other cultures across time, and one example is Nuwa and Fuzi from China. They created the Earth, but you can see the intertwined snakes, but with the compass and straight edge, a reference to, well, the great architect and geometry, which is another constant theme. But so one thing that Nuwa and Fuzi did was they created humanity, and then they also taught them skills such as hunting, fishing, raising domesticated animals, as well as writing. Very much in line with the tradition of Thoth, being this a god who delivered knowledge, and a god connected to geometry, which is geo, earth, metry, measure, so weights and measures being a key theme repeated as well. And we see how also Thoth taught humanity the art of writing, and a very similar theme with the snakes there as well. In Sumer, Ningisida, we can see again, so you see again the intertwined snakes, but you'll notice these two figures on either side carrying the rod, which could also be called the wand, and it's a measuring tool, and will show, because there are many connections across many cultures regarding weights and measures, and the power of weights and measures, it's a basis of law and trade. Amongst the oldest books of law is the concept of honesty in weights and measures. One of the most the key powers that a king or a ruler, as in a ruler literally, has, is that he defines what the weights and measures are of the kingdom, which is essential for trade, taxation, keeping peace as well, because once you have a standard weight and measure, it also stops arguments. It's, you know, it's a peacemaking tool amongst many other things, and this is a theme we'll look into more. So again, yeah, we see the measuring rod or the wand on either side. Now this is an Aztec sculpture. Some references say it's Quetzalcoatl, which is a snake as well. But again, these intertwined snakes appearing again. Some say it's a Aztec warrior. Some say it's Quetzalcoatl, but I haven't confirmed it. Maybe someone else will. But again, this theme, just like Quetzalcoatl in South America, he brought knowledge. He taught the people these skills. So very much in line with the same, whether it's Thoth, Nuwa and Fuzi, Ningishzida, and we'll see some other gods, important gods as well. So now we have Hermes, and there we see what's sometimes called the Kundalini, but the Caduceus. Now it's not as apparent in this diagram, but we do see the snakes on the edge, and we'll explain those, but also the winged feet, which is an important theme. And also the more traditional statue, or you'll see of Mercury, which is the god, the Roman name for Hermes, but now the snakes is very clear. Again, the winged feet, the winged cap, because he's a patron god of travelers, and so you can see Hermes is very often shown with this big, broad-rimmed hat, the traveler's hat, it's called. So that's one of the powers. Now, in all the videos I do in regards to Hermetic architecture, well, Hermes or Mercury with the two snakes carrying the rod. Also, the references to grain is another port, and well, time as well. But that's and again, this is Missouri state capital. Same themes again. Even the cornucopia once more. So that's another important one. There you can see the cornucopia. And I'll get to this. This is Hermanubis. This is again the same. It's a fusion of Hermes and Anubis, and I'll get to that because there's a lot of references, a lot of meaning in regards to here. And again, weights and measures, a god of science and knowledge, but also as Anubis is connected to the underworld, so is Thoth. As we'll see, Hermes is also connected to the underworld. Another mosaic. Okay, so Mercurius or Hermes. He's on this chariot now. He's also got this little tool in his hand. I'll explain that as well. One of the special powers of Mercury or Hermes was that he could travel in between the land of the living and the land of the dead, and that's another connection to both Anubis and to Thoth and the Book of the Dead. But the Caduceus, this rod that he carries with the two snakes, well, how did he get this rod? It goes back to, so Hermes was a trickster. He was a trickster god. And before I go, let's just have a look at some of the meanings of what is Hermes, what is Mercury. So Hermes to the Greek, Mercury to the Roman, the winged feet, the traveller's hat, and the two snakes on the coil of the Caduceus. So Hermes or Mercury was the god of tricksters because he's very clever, not because he's evil, because he's a trickster. He's not in an evil way, but it's about, again, knowledge and being very smart. That's because that's one of, so just like Thoth is a god of knowledge and magic, well, what a magician is a trickster. He's also the god of commerce and also the god of weights and measures. Just like Thoth, he was connected to one of his key most important powers. One of the most important powers that a ruler or a pharaoh has is to define what weights and measures are. Therefore, taxation, land, trade, and all these foundation stones of any civilization. He was also the patron god of travelers, and this is a reference again to weights and measures and secret knowledge. That's the knowledge of navigation, which is about astronomy as well, about understanding the stars, the way the sun and the moon move through the sky. And of course, the god of knowledge is science. This is another, like the sciences. Now, they had sciences back then, which included like alchemy, but metallurgy. They were very skilled at making, well, even paint, dyes, metallurgy. All these things were sciences. That's one of the powers of it and why they were so connected to it. So this idea of ancient science, you've got to look at it as well. What were they doing in trade, shipbuilding? All these skills, navigation, are encompassed in knowledge, or what we would now call science. And the Caduceus and the knowledge of the god of knowledge, the god of sciences, that's why doctors still connected to it to this day. This is a symbol of knowledge. Okay, now back to, so how did Hermes get this Caduceus? Well, to begin with, he was Hermes the trickster god, and as an infant he snuck away from his, this shows him sleeping, but he snuck away from his crib and he stole the cattle of his brother Apollo. Now this is a picture from Dalian City in China, and where you'll find these Hermetic symbols, Hermes, Hermetic, is interesting because you wouldn't think of it in China. Well, this is a statue in China, so the golden boy, the child stealing the cattle of Apollo, and the different stories, but again, he flew away with them. The power of flight was one of Hermes or Mercury's powers, and that's why he has the wings on his feet, for instance. So Hermes snuck away with the cattle, hid them, and then he snuck back and tried to pretend that it wasn't him. Apollo saw through this story and he knew it was Hermes. He blamed Hermes. One of the skills of Apollo is also his ability to see through lies. So, for instance, in the one of the Corvus, the blackbird, the servant bird of Apollo, he stole. He was ordered to go and fetch a cup of water for Apollo. He took his time, lingered around, then he blamed his lateness on the water snake, and he come back. And that's why the constellations Hydra and Corvus are up there in the sky. That's like, again, this theme. Apollo is a bit of a judge. The Delian problem begins with a plague because the people were judged, and Apollo shot an arrow at them. So that's one of the connections with Apollo. He's also the god of music, and that's why he carries this lyre. And this is very important in reference to the Hermes story. So Hermes stole the cattle. He couldn't get them back. Apollo told the story to their father Zeus, and Zeus laughed at the exploits of Hermes. This didn't make Apollo happy. It was almost a war on Olympus. So he was enraged. It was nearly a battle, a war on Olympus. So what happened was that Hermes then gave Apollo a lyre made of a tortoiseshell. Here we see the lyre and a tortoiseshell. And why I have this picture, because these are both from the Archibald Fountain in Sydney, which is loaded with this Greek symbolism and these Greek stories. And so often in Capitol buildings, major fountains, major artworks, it's loaded with Hermetic knowledge. It's just, it's literally telling a story. And as you move around, if you understand what the gods mean and what their places are and the symbols connected to them. Well, this tortoise, so there's no actual Hermes on this sculpture, but this tortoise as part of a fountain, underneath Apollo here. Again, it's a reference, secrets in plain sight, so to speak. So Hermes gave Apollo the lyre, made a tortoiseshell, Apollo music, and in appreciation Apollo was so grateful of this gift from Hermes that he gave him a wand made of an olive branch. And this is where the expression to extend an olive branch to someone comes from. It's a symbol of peace, because with this exchange of gifts, there was peace on Olympus. And another important thing is that the word wand literally translates in Greek to measuring rod. Hermes is a god of weights and measures. The rod which he carries is literally a rod for measure. And so there was peace between the brothers with the exchange of the wand or the rod and the lyre, and peace was brought to Olympus. Now there's another reference to the an olive branch, but okay, before we go there, but however, this picture is a little bit, it's not deceptive, but not 100% true. Okay, there's a bit of a typo scene that should be there, but however, the wand here, which is a Caduceus, was not yet developed. So Apollo just gave him a wand, a straight wand, a measuring rod. What happened later was that as Hermes was traveling along, he saw two snakes fighting. These are black mambas, but you could get similar cobras and other things. You could also confuse it when the male and female get together, but this is actually two males fighting. This is how. So Hermes saw these two snakes fighting. He put the rod between them, the wand, separated them and brought peace, and that's how the Caduceus come. So now the Caduceus is fully formed. It's a measuring rod, and it's also a symbol of peace. It's another reference to the lyre and this one being a symbol of peace. And this is, so again, this is why, like, this is a GPO across Sydney, everywhere this symbol will appear, and this is what it means. It's a truly Hermetic symbol. It's a symbol of measurement, but it's also a symbol with deeper symbolism in regards to peace. And measurement brings peace. Standard weights and measures, trade, it's essential to peace. And again, and back to Thoth, the two rods bringing the upper and lower kingdom together with the snakes combined. Well, the upper and the lower kingdom presumably because they are different kings defining different weights and measures. So this is another symbolic reference to bringing peace together, but also unifying under under one pharaoh who defines one set of law. And one of the first laws any pharaoh or king has to bring is what is a foot to measure land, trade, and all these things that go along with it. So as we saw, the wand of Hermes, as well as the lyre and the story surrounding the development of the Caduceus, has many connections to symbols of peace. And so here we have an olive branch, and I've picked it off so we have 13 leaves showing. Well, there are many other interesting connections to this as a symbol of peace and a symbol of hope. And one of them is, well, from the Ark of Utnapishtim, from the Epic of Gilgamesh. After the flood described there in the Sumerian legend, he released a dove, a columba, a raven, and a swallow. But the dove was a sign of peace, that the flood had ended and that hope and peace had returned to the earth. Now that extends also to the constellation columba. And the constellations around it also tell something of a story regarding this, because there are many navigation and shipping symbols in there. But again, Columba, the dove brought back a branch, Noah, or Utnapishtim, as in the much, much older story from the Epic of Gilgamesh tells. And we have a branch with these olive leaves, and even the depictions will show, if you like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe, but again, 13 leaves on the olive branch is a very common symbol. And by that also, well, if we come back to olive branch with 13 leaves, where do we find that? Well, the UN flag, for one, and again, this not the biggest fan of it, but one of the ideals behind it, one of the motivating philosophy is this concept of peace, and we see the 13 leaves. But you'll also find that, again, I showed earlier the American dollar bill loaded with Hermetic symbolism, including the acanthus for one, but we also see the 13 arrows and the olive branch with the 13 leaves, a symbol of peace. Now this eagle is not exclusive to America, even if you count there are 32 feathers and 33, and or 13 colonies. But this eagle symbol, okay, even the 13 stars there, but one of the references, because you'll find this eagle in other places, and what we have is peace, and we also have war with the arrows, and this, a bit like the saying goes, to have peace, you must be prepared for war. And again, this is, you'll find this, the eagle symbol with the peace and the war across many other places as well. So we have the olive branch as peace, but also weights and measures, and that being important too.